Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn and this episode of Dissident Dispatch. Um, big show tonight. Before I get started, I would like to ask you to please go ahead and hit the like button and the share so we can get more people here watching live with us. Also, if you're not already a subscriber to this channel, please go ahead and consider subscribing to be notified when I make more content for the channel. Um, One of the things I'm going to say to preface all of my Dissident Dispatch shows from now on is something I want to get ingrained in your minds. Everything I'm about to tell you about this or any other subject, any Monday that I come to you, I want you to remember they, as in the powers that be behind everything I'm about to tell you, could not do it without your money, and they could not do it without your compliance. These are two core facts. They could not do it without your money. They could not do it without your compliance. So just keep that in mind as we go along. Again, this or any other topic related to education, it's all the same. So today, as the advertising explains on the thumbnail, we're going to talk about the role empathy plays, or rather, not empathy, but the teaching of empathy to students in K-12 in particular, but it continues on into college. The teaching of empathy, the emphasis on empathy as a means of making, a better world, improving social justice, et cetera, but how it is having paradoxical effect. It's having the opposite effect. And we see that right now most prominently with the rise in anti-Semitism. It is by no means exclusive to a rise in anti-Semitism. Pick pick a topic that you'll see people protesting about where they get filled with hate and vitriolic and hurling epithets at people. If it's turf, if they call white cis hetero, whatever the words are that are spitting out of a young person's mouth, whenever you see sort of sadistic behavior, defacement of property, blocking roads, you can't get by, whether it was during BLM, whether it's now, doesn't matter. You're seeing that in part, this is my argument, because of the emphasis on empathy in our schools, making empathy a means of moral decision making. That if you teach empathy, people who are marinating in that idea of what empathy is, how to feel it, etc., that is the key to moral decision making. And I'm here to tell you, no, it is not. Not even close. In fact, I would argue, whether it's anti-Semitism or some other kind of hatred, we're just going to be focusing tonight on anti-Semitism because it is rising most sharply across both left and right. So a lot of the other hatreds you see more prominently on the left. Anti-Semitism is on both. And I still think it's largely because of the empathy thing. But what I submit to you, my argument is that not only is empathy not a way of making moral decisions, that's not how we do it. That's not a good way to do it. It's not even a way to do it. But that you can feel zero empathy for someone and still make a moral decision about what to do in a given situation. It's not necessary. You don't need to take someone else's perspective in order to make a moral decision about them or about yourself or about what to do in the world. I would argue principle is more important than perspective. All day, every day. All day, every day. And the problem I have with the teaching of empathy is it is replacing the teaching of principles. The kind of principles at once upon a time, at least in my imagination, I don't know, maybe it never was true, Americans stood for. Things like all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator, whoever you think that might be, with certain inalienable rights. And that we all should have, that we should be equal in, under the law, have equal opportunity, have things like property rights, and our property rights should be protected. That one of the main purposes of government is to protect our property rights, to protect our civil rights, to our life and our liberty and our speech and things like that. That these core principles were universal. And it didn't matter if I like you or not. I don't even have to agree with you. I don't have to have empathy for you. I don't have to give a damn about you. That those principles came first. No more. With perspective taking and empathy, something else becomes more important. But, rather than ramble on about it, I want to share with you the articles that sort of gave me the idea for tonight's show. This comes from a brand new Substack that I discovered, and it is called A Second Look. And so I'm going to let this individual, this is a mom and somebody who I believe follows me on Twitter, on X, who decided I'm going to start blogging, or I'm going to start writing Substack articles. And wow, what a couple of openers she's got. I highly recommend that you go and subscribe, even though there's only 2 pieces there so far, because I expect more good things. So here's the question that she asks. Why do so many public school and university students support the genocide of Jews? And you might say, oh, do they really? Do they support the genocide of Jews? Well, yes, they do. Yes, they do. She argues compellingly that they do. Let's go through it, shall we? It's a jarring sight. Videos circulating on social media of high school and college students supporting Hamas. I'm going to make this bigger if I can. Can I zoom in this? Okay, I can. High school and college students supporting Hamas, marching through hallways, chanting things like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." It's a genocidal chant, and no need to play coy any longer. They all know it, and we all know they know it. It's a bit strange that this would be happening during a time when schools and universities are so focused on cultivating empathy in students to create emotionally safe spaces. So first things first, I'm glad she has said, let's stop playing coy. No need to play coy anymore. They know what it means. I know there've been these man on the street things of like, what river, what sea do you even? I don't know. I'm not really sure. It has been made clear. And I promise you, the leaders of Students for Justice in Palestine and other organizations that are leading these protests know perfectly well what "from the river to the sea" means. Nobody doesn't know what it means anymore. I won't believe it. And I actually would say, since we are now in March and October is in the rear view by several months, there's no excuse. Anybody who is going to go out and march and protest and scream and yell and block highways and vandalize property and block access to a classroom or a speaker and doesn't explicitly know what they're calling for with "from the river to the sea" is guilty anyway. There are certain kinds of guilt that I can assign to people, and that is a level of ignorance that I refuse to accept. So whether they're lying or they're too stupid to be outside protesting and they're guilty just the same, you're giving aid and comfort to people, bad people, without doing your due diligence. And as far as I'm concerned, you're just as bad. And I think the same people going, no, 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 they don't know, are the people who would say everybody present on the mall or at the Capitol on January 6th is equally culpable because they should have known what was going to go down and they should know. Okay, well, if you take that approach, I promise you should take the same. To be consistent, you should take the same with these protesters. They know. It's ridiculous to say they don't anymore. Okay. And yet parents will be surprised to hear that the focus on cultivating empathy is to blame for much of what's going on. I wonder if you guys were surprised or if some of you were like, yeah, I agree. It's toxic. And if so, if you already knew that, congrats to you. You already get it. But we're going to go into like how, a little bit more of the mechanics of how it happens, thanks to this author of this piece. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Parents find it hard to understand how this can be a bad thing or how this can lead to support for terrorism and genocide. It's counterintuitive. Doesn't more empathy mean that people will be kinder to one another? Wouldn't there be less bad people doing bad things in the world if schools focused on teaching empathy to all kids at an early age? The answer is no. I'm going to stop there for a second. We're going to go on, but just think about it. Like, Could you, just you, in your own life, could you feel empathy for every person you come in contact with and every person whose behavior you have to evaluate? Is it even possible? Let's say you thought it was a worthy goal. Is it possible to do? Could you take the break? If you're a parent of multiple kids, and you would think it's probably desirable for me to take the perspective of both of my children if they're in an argument. Okay, I got two kids, they're fighting with each other. I want to hear this side of the story. I want to hear that side of the story. It's probably a good idea for me to try to take each of their perspectives. But could you maintain that all the way through in every single argument? Or is it probably highly likely that at some point you're going to have to make a decision? And you're going to make that decision irrespective of how much empathy you have? One kid is upset and jealous. This one, she had two cookies and I only had two cookies. Wait, you both had two cookies, but I ate mine really fast and now I have no cookies and she still has two cookies. Well, yeah, but I mean, I feel for you, kiddo. You don't have any cookies now. Must suck to watch somebody eating their cookies, but you can't eat your cookies too fast. You're going to make a decision. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it to make the point. Your empathy for the child crying they don't have any cookies is irrelevant in this equation. Their behavior led to the consequence of them not having any damn cookies to eat after dinner. And now you can extrapolate out from that to all kinds of other things. Oh, this person grew up with nothing and they had a terrible home life and they were beaten and they were abused and this happened and that happened and there's crime and there's so forth and there's so on. And this person over here didn't. And this person stole their property. And you would say, well, I feel so much empathy for this person and so on and so forth. Is it going to be a moral decision if you decide that it was okay for this person to violate this person's rights because you feel for them? Is that how you make moral decisions? I feel for them. They had a tough life. Therefore, what? So what? So you feel for them. That does not change their behavior. And that's the point that they go on to make. So I wanted to lay that out there because it just doesn't even compute. And I don't see parents saying to schools who are saying, we're going to teach them empathy. I don't hear anybody going, why? Like, why? To what end? Because they tell you right up front, it's going to lead to better decision making or going to lead to a kinder world or a more just world. This is a claim that doesn't get challenged. You just go, okay. And I'm here to tell you, challenge it. Challenge it. Say, how do you know? Why? Why is that even desirable? Yale researcher Paul Bloom wrote about this in his book, Against Empathy, The Case for Rational Compassion. In the book, he discussed that it is impossible to empathize with 7 billion people at once because the sheer numbers are totally overwhelming and incomprehensible. Instead, what happens with empathy is that we assign people to a designated in-group, aka the good guys, and a designated out-group, aka the bad guys. These days, schools teach the in-group worthy of empathy is the marginalized, the poor, the oppressed, whereas the out-group worthy of blame are the oppressors, which are generally identified as the rich, white, cis, heteropatriarchy. In this case, Palestinians are considered the oppressed and marginalized, and Jewish people are considered the oppressors, the colonials, etc. So here's what parents really need to understand about what's going on. Under the premise of teaching kids how to be empathetic, schools are training kids to only have empathy for one group of predetermined so-called good guys. And remember, I said you kind of have to make a choice. It's not possible to feel equal amounts of empathy for everybody. And even if you did, you're going to choose, at some point, you're going to choose sides. When you make that moral distinction, you just are. And especially if somebody is nudging you to say that there's good guys and there's bad guys, and these deserve empathy and they don't. And that's not so wacky. Do you think Hitler deserves empathy? Do you think Stalin deserved empathy? What about Mao? Should we feel empathy for poor Mao? Pol Pot. Pol Pot was just trying to make people better. He was just trying to help. Poor guy. I mean, should we feel empathy for the German guards at Auschwitz where, maybe they felt forced to do what they were doing? Should we feel empathy for them that they were just brainwashed and they didn't know what they were doing? Really? No, at some point you have to decide there's good guys and there's bad guys. But if you decide on who I feel more empathy for or whose perspective I relate to more or who I'm literally told deserves it more, it doesn't necessarily follow that it's a moral decision. That's not how we do it. Okay. So And they're teaching them there's good guys and there's bad guys. Instead of teaching kids to judge each person individually based on their character, which is the Martin Luther King Jr. approach that all parents think schools teach, these schools do the opposite by priming students to see groups as collective within group roles, group characteristics, group flaws, etc. So it's into that critical view, the critical world view of winners and losers and a fixed pie and all that, that the empathy lessons come. They're not occurring in a vacuum. And they're not occurring in a space where a lot of parents believe that they're teaching the American values of individual liberty and truth and justice and all these whatever it is that you think they're teaching. No, they're not. No, they're not. These two things are happening side by side. You should feel empathy for these people because they're marginalized. You can't separate the two. And I would still be against them teaching empathy as an objective good in the absence of that. Even if we were still back in the old time of, individual liberty, et cetera, what role empathy? Where does the empathy fit in? I don't need it. All I need is the law. Literally, all I need is the law. That individual liberties are protected under the law. You don't get to take my stuff or hurt me, whether you like me or not. Doesn't matter what you think of me. You don't need to feel empathy for me. You don't need to teach kids empathy in order to respect those principles. So the argument that they do and that's going to make things better is straight up a lie. In addition, they are teaching kids that equity is a moral imperative. See, that's how they get started. Equity is a moral imperative. Oh, look, there's unequal groups of people. The ones who are down rather than up in some kind of estimation, if it's, power, so-called privilege, money, whatever you want to call it, they must be the bad ones because the good is associated with lesser, lower achievement on the socioeconomic scale, somebody who doesn't fit the norm, whatever the norm might be, everything from identifies with their biological, chromosomes, okay, or can pay their own rent. So that's the bad guy. Because equity is a moral imperative. We hear that word a lot, equity, and it's so easy to get it confused with equality. And so let's define it quickly and talk about how it's completely different. Equity and equality are not the same. We've talked about this ad nauseum for 3 years on this channel. So, equity does not allow fair competition. And if anything, it ensures there's no such thing as fair chances to compete. Equity is comparing different racial, ethnic, identity groups to one another. And if one group is deemed disproportionately successful in their outcomes, then working towards equity would mean that levers need to be pulled in order to fix that. That's presumably something that is broken. Otherwise, everything would be equal, right? Let's just completely throw out all context, individual talents, interests, motivations. Biology, you name it. We should all end up in the same place, I guess. Why I'm not playing for the NBA, I just don't understand. Life is so unfair. Many schools are using empathy as a bait and switch, and they say that they are going to cultivate empathy within the child, and instead they teach them how to judge people based on these collective group characteristics and how to discriminate against the bad guys, the bad guy out group. If this sounds immoral to you, that's because it is. And if you're going to walk away from this article with one takeaway message, it's this: empathy is not a moral value, and oftentimes the focus on empathy can lead to immoral behavior. So here, what she's saying to you is we make equity the moral good, the highest virtue, the highest thing to aspire to. Well, equity doesn't exist. Then we judge the people who don't have equal outcomes or desirable outcomes. They must be oppressed. I now take the perspective of the oppressed, feel empathy for them. That makes me good by association. Now I'm good. Even if I was one of the up group, I can outsource my morality to their lack of good outcome. I'm now a good person if I empathize with them. It's very narcissistic, this empathy. It's weird, right? Kind of cancels itself out. Empathy is not supposed to satisfy your need to feel like a good guy. But that's exactly what it does. That's what it does. A 2014 paper in the Perspective of Psychological Sciences journal titled Friends or Foes, Is Empathy Necessary for Moral Behavior? Explained this as follows. In reality, empathy is not always a direct avenue to moral behavior. Indeed, at times, empathy can interfere with moral decision-making by introducing partiality. for instance, by favoring kin and in-group members, or the out-group members that you feel sorry for or feel guilty about not being one of. Without a definitive moral code, the way that people treat you is at the whim of whether you're deemed to be part of the in group or the out group. Many immoral historical figures were deeply empathetic. For example, the Nazis took great measures to bolster animal welfare during the Holocaust. That is a fact. Amazing, isn't it? They were empathetic towards the Aryan race and animals, which were their designated good guys. Students are taught immorality under the guise of empathy. When parents think about schools, they assume that a Judeo Christian moral framework is being taught within behavioral expectations like do not murder, do not torture, do not kidnap, do not rape. The basics. And yet, what does it mean when students are chanting support for Hamas and yelling at schools resistance by any means necessary? Some of the means endorsed to justify what they call resistance include murder, torture, kidnap, and rape. Why are students chanting there's only one solution, intifada revolution? Israel had two intifadas in the past, and there were years of terrorist activities in which jihadists blew up innocent civilians, attacked Jewish daycares and elementary schools, and murdered women and children indiscriminately. So you might think to yourself, well, wait a minute. If they're teaching my kids empathy, shouldn't they feel empathy for the murdered children? I mean, especially if they are children, the murdered students, teenagers, murdered parents, raped women, etc. No. Why would they feel empathy for them? Remember, they're in the out group. They're the bad guys. We're not supposed to feel empathy, but we have to choose. We can't feel equally for everybody. So they're the designated bad guys. So that doesn't count. I have no other framework for deciding what is moral. It's got to be empathy. Many parents would like to believe that their children do not fully understand the context behind the slogans. I've come to the conclusion that they chant the slogans because they understand them and agree with them. Unbeknownst to the parent, they have been taught an immoral framework that is completely different from what the parents teach within the household. Parents can remember this, and so much of what is happening will click into place. Empathy is not moral, and when empathy education is paired with the oppressor-oppressed framework, it steers students on a path towards cruelty without limit. If I get you to care on some deep level about something super arbitrary, like someone who's poor, someone who's a different race than you, somebody thousands of miles away on the other side of the ocean who's experiencing something that you see constantly in negative images. If I can get you to feel like there's empathy there, I can get you to do unspeakable things to the people you think are causing it. Thank you. Thank you, Pirate Tomsky. Am I the only one who thinks about Mexican food when I hear intifada? I'll get my coat. True story. So do I. Not gonna lie. I don't know. It's like the weirdest word. Honest, it's true. You're not the only one, but I've just never heard anyone else say it besides in my head. So yeah, you're not alone. Schools teach compassionate terrorism, but what is it about learning about empathy that leads students to these loud and destructive behaviors that pull these communities apart? The answer is that schools are teaching students that a moral imperative is to engage in activism to correct any perceived inequities, which in this case looks like demonstrations, protests, and harassment of Jews. Today, some of the most popular social emotional learning programs for children as young as elementary school are imprinting into their students' minds that empathy plus action equals compassion. This is verbatim what is being taught in social emotional learning curriculum. Second Step, one of the most commonly used SEL programs in the country, has posters that teachers can order or download and put in the classroom that proclaim that compassion is empathy in action. So what's the action in this case? The action is the protest against what they are now calling a genocide. So what are the steps? We've created an in-group, out-group. In-group are the so-called marginalized, the Palestinians. Out-group, Jews, Israelis, anybody who sympathizes with Israelis, which is pretty much 99% of Jews and a whole lot of Christians and other people who are sympathetic to Israel. They're Zionists, right? They're the bad guys. Well, if I want to be compassionate, I have to feel for the good guys and take action, which means going out and protesting. Well, what do I protest? I protest what I'm told to say. From the river to the sea, intifada revolution, all of these things, which is essentially calling for harm to come to the bad guys, my designated bad guys, which is the Jews. And now I'm a compassionate person. I'm a good person because I'm feeling for the right people. All of those students marching through hallways wearing terrorist garb and chanting genocidal slogans believe they're being compassionate, but it is specifically toward an oppressed group. Quite simply, the people who are not worthy of this compassion is the outgroup, the so called bad guys, the Jews. And we're going to get to, I'm going to talk in the show when I get done with reading this article. I am going to talk about how it got this way. In other words, how it was decided that the Jews were the outgroup, because there may be some of you saying, but Jews have been persecuted. Jews are a minority. Jews aren't all white. There's plenty of brown Jews. There's people in Israel, there are black Jews. I don't get it. I don't get it, Deb. I don't understand. How is this teeny tiny minority the oppressor when you have Arabs all over the world they have 81 Muslim countries. Arabs conquered like most of the Middle East and implanted themselves as as colonizers. You had the Ottoman Empire with their Muslim conquest. I don't get it. How did this happen? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how history has been taught for the last 20 years minimum to set the wheels in motion to make it just a snap of a finger that the Jews are the bad guys and the so-called Palestinians are the good guys. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen just since October 7th. It didn't happen just because, Arabs are more brown. It didn't happen because Jews have a lot of control of the media. No. It didn't have to do with that. This was set in motion quite intentionally at least 20 years ago, and I'll show you how. And it just made it very, very easy for them to kind of flip the switch. Let's see. Finally, we come back to the earlier question posed, which is whether we would have less bad people or more kind people if we had more empathy. The question makes several false assumptions. The first false assumption is it's possible for teachers who are untrained in mental health to teach empathy to students who are essentially involuntary mental health clients. Any seasoned therapist will tell you how extraordinarily difficult it is to teach this to most people who are voluntarily engaged in the process. In other words, if I go to a therapist and I say, I would like to be a more empathetic person, I want to be able to better take the perspective of my child, my husband, my friends, my boss, whatever, I'm finding it's difficult to relate to people, help me be a more empathetic person. The therapist, a good one, will tell you that's hard. We can try things we can do, but especially the older you get, not so easy. What most people will tell you is that empathy is it's a learned behavior or a learned trait and behavior from it being modeled. In other words, it's not something you can like teach in a classroom with a whiteboard and a bunch of lessons or even exercises and activities. It is watching people be empathetic and, more importantly, even than that, feeling it coming at you. So in other words, you, the child, are receiving empathy from your parent primarily. And through that, you understand, this is what it feels like when somebody can like relate to me or feel my feelings. And then you watch them doing it with your siblings or your dad or your mom or whatever. And you start to see this is a thing. And if you haven't learned that and internalized it by about the age of 8, you haven't sort of flip the empathy switch by then, it's really, really hard to teach it. What is something that can get in the way of real empathy development is taking a kid away from their parent, shoving them in an involuntary situation similar to a prison, and then basically telling them what they have to do every single moment, regardless of whether they want to do it or not, or are able to do it, and judging them if they can't. Even something as simple as, I have to go to the bathroom, you need to wait. Wait your turn, wait for the hall pass, somebody else is going. Is that empathetic? The kid has to pee. I mean, something as simple as, I'm hungry, lunch is in an hour. I don't want to sit next to that person. They kind of scare me because they beat me up yesterday in recess. Too bad, so sad. That's your seat. Now you have to go have a restorative circle with somebody. Are any of these behaviors empathetic towards the student? So how much empathy are they really learning from this environment that they're in? Never mind what kind of SEL or second step they're told. So I would argue that it's empathy in name only, but in fact, they're learning that the world is divided into people who are sort of like winners, losers, good guys, bad guys, powerful, not powerful, and they're jockeying for position in that, and they're being incentivized to go where they perceive the power is, and the power at the moment is with these loud voices screaming and yelling about what they want and they don't have. Kids are pretty savvy about what it takes to survive, and they figuring that out. That's the social currency. So, a second false assumption is that it's safe for untrained teachers to be doing mental health interventions and attempting to cultivate emotions such as empathy among students who may have actual mental illness or trauma. So they might be coming from a chaotic household, and now you're trying to teach them empathy when no one is showing them any. Probably not going to work so well. A third assumption is that increased empathy automatically leads to increased immoral behaviors. We've talked about that. It does not. Um, if it's not empathy taught in schools is not tied to traditional morality of do not murder, do not torture, do not rape, do not steal, do not assault, do not name call, do not do all those things. It's really not what it's tied to. Instead, it's taught in the context of give more power and resources to the oppressed and take power and resources away from the oppressors. There's no evidence that empathy taught in this context will increase what parents typically consider to be moral behaviors. Some experts believe that when you have someone who's predisposed to bullying or who may enjoy hurting others, teaching them empathy might only make them more emotionally attuned and sophisticated at hurting others. Think about that for a second. Teach somebody how to take the perspective of another person. But if their personality need is for power, if it to feel significant, meaningful, important, and powerful supersedes, I want to be a nice person, which it can, depending on the background of the child, and even to a certain extent, their inborn personality traits, they can learn to suss out the weaknesses of the people around them, capitalize on them, and be ruthless, absolutely ruthless. So, they quickly figure out how to use that against people. There is no evidence that empathy taught in okay, so we talked about that. As Paul Bloom writes in Against Empathy, the case for rational compassion, empathy makes good people better than because kind people don't like suffering, and empathy makes this suffering salient. If you made a sadist more empathetic, it would lead to a happier sadist. That's all. More effective one too. In this newfangled educational system that is hyperfixated on the idea of equity, which is de facto the act of ruthlessly punishing people based on the actions and outcomes of their racial and ethnic groups, sadists will rise to the top and be rewarded. Doesn't that sort of sound familiar? Does that seem like what we're seeing? We're seeing a lot of really sadistic people gain a lot of power and traction in our society. In this way, you have the ingredients necessary to create an environment for the dehumanization and persecution of a targeted group, which in this case is Jews. The four-step process schools use to cultivate seeds of a genocide. Number one, schools creating a defined in-group and out-group. We know they've done this. You have schools removing Judeo-Christian moral framework to guide behaviors and set limits on violent or cruel behaviors. You have schools that encourage activist behaviors that harass, vilify, and condemn the out-group, allegedly for compassionate purposes, allegedly to right wrongs, allegedly to help the good guys. They don't even discuss it in terms of harming the bad guys, even though that's what they're doing. It's to help the good guys in order to, we have to do this. And you have schools with untrained teachers possibly doing irresponsible and harmful interventions with students who may be actually mentally ill. These untrained teachers may cultivate more sophisticated antisocial behaviors among the sadists and bullies within the group. We've seen this. If this is happening in your child's school or university, there is, to put it mildly, a lot going on with regard to their core beliefs, moral framework, and the approach to problem solving that they've been taught by their school. The first step is to be aware of it. One of my goals in this article is to leave parents inspired to take heart and learn something uplifting or useful. There's tremendous value in understanding what has led to the present moment and what continues to perpetuate the problem day by day. Most parents had no idea how the education system is cultivating this bias and hatred of Jews, even for those who are not Jews. The oppressor-oppressed ideology may well come for you too. As history has shown time and again, Jews are the canaries in the coal mine. Knowing this information now means you have the power to ask questions, gather information, make changes, and protect your families. For the majority of people who are able to see what's in front of their eyes, this will not be the end of the story, but instead it's just the beginning. So I'm sorry I kind of read that to you and went really fast, but it was so good. And I thought the core point that they've taken critical theory, good guys, bad guys, oppressor, oppressed, and intersectionality, put empathy on top of that, and your child on the receiving end of this goes, I can't feel empathy for I can't and I shouldn't feel empathy for the oppressors. I have to feel it for the oppressed. So now, in order to feel empathy for the oppressed, I have to be mad. I have to be angry. I have to hate. I really do have to feel a level of bigotry towards these outgroups by default, and Jews are in the outgroup. They just are. So now what you might be wondering, and I'm going to drop the link to this article in the chat, and then I'll go over the chat to see what some of y'all have been saying, see if there's anything I need to surface. So here's the article. I'll pin it as soon as I get past the little thing. Okay, so let's see what some of y'all are saying. We've got okay. Hello to everybody who said hello. I would single you all out, but I am just grateful that you're here. Paratomsky says equity is anti-talent. Very true. It's like, where did talent go? Apparently it's only in sports, and only some of them, apparently. He also says, yeah, you need to apply those levels to the lowest common denominator and push society downward. That's the only way to get equity, is to bring down. You can't make all the blades of grass grow to the same height. So you mow it. Look, they're all the same. Then we get Goy Goddess says Hitler was a vegetarian. All the vegans and vegetarians sort of empathy with him. That's a great point. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Empathy is not a way of making moral decisions about people's behavior. There are people I intensely dislike for a wide variety of reasons. Some personal reasons. Sometimes I just disagree with their opinions. But as you've heard said before, I would defend to the death their right to hold their opinion, speak their mind, say their opinion, whatever. I would defend that. Now, where I'm going to stop is when their expression of that opinion is incitement or they are lying and so on. I'm still going to defend the right to say it, but I'm going to want to jump in and say you're a liar. But I don't have to like them to defend their rights. If somebody breaks into their home, even if they're the biggest jerk in the world, but somebody breaks into their home and decides, I'm going to squat in this guy's house and I'm going to take over and I'm going to use the New York squatters' rights to just make this my house, whatever. I'm still going to oppose. I'm not going to go, haha, couldn't happen to a better guy. Yeah, take his house. Much as I might like to, I know that's not moral. That's wrong. Because principles. Squatters' rights are wrong. Property rights are right. They're correct. Even when it's somebody's property who I don't like. Okay. Let's see, getting down to I knew Debs would be going off when I saw a tweet about SEL. Yes, it's very true. From the river to the sea, intifada with shrimp and avocado. Don't forget the spicy peppers. Yes, needing power does sound like a leftist. Absolutely. And hello, Nomo. Glad you are here. Glad you could make it. All right. So we talked about how empathy is not a way to make moral decisions, how you need to ask more questions about it when you see it pop up at your kid's school and say, but why? Like, why are you taking time to teach empathy? To what end? And if they say they'll make better decisions, they'll be nicer people, they'll be more moral people, challenge that. There's no evidence to back that up. And there's a mountain of evidence to say that it's not true. And in fact, the opposite is happening, especially when you use this other framework. So now what I'm going to show you, because I said we would talk about how it got this way. It's 2024 right now. And that means that people who are teaching your kids may well have been in middle school in the early 2000s. Safe to say, right? People are teaching elementary school, middle school, even high school to a certain extent, may have been in middle school or high school in the earlier part, in like, let's say 2000 or even 2005 or whatever, around that time frame. In fact, I would say maybe most of them were. And what I'm about to go through is a paper put out by the Fordham Foundation called The Stealth Curriculum, Manipulating America's History Teachers. And this dates back to the earlier part of the 2000s. And that's why I think it's so relevant. First of all, a lot of the curriculum they're talking about is still being used. And it also was used when these people were learning their history in the first place as students and were learning how to be teachers. So those two things combined, I think, primed at the pump to have them go into the schools and teach the good guy, bad guy, where the Jews were the bad guys. And Muslims in general, never mind Palestinians, but Muslims in general were the good guys, the oppressed. Okay. So I've taken the liberty of going through this and doing some highlighting. The introduction, or the forward rather, was pretty relevant. Obviously, I'm not going to read everything to you, but the idea behind this paper is that the woman who there was a researcher uh, who brought this to the attention of Fordham. She was working in the Massachusetts Department of Education at the time. And she said, "Hey, there's something going on, and we need to surface this. Let me do a research paper about this." And so what they found was, the reason it's called the stealth curriculum is not so much that there was a curriculum out there, like a curriculum that some secret people were like, let's get the dark, stealthy curriculum in there. It's that the way curriculum is chosen, and way it has been chosen since No Child Left Behind on forward, but it really picked up steam in Common Core, is that there's this sort of shadowy world, this cottage industry for producing supplementary materials, filling in gaps that either can't make it into a textbook because textbooks are, printed once every so many years and they have to be approved and it's a slow process and so on. So if they don't adequately cover something that's in the news, something that's hot, something that's a topic that, people seem to want to talk about or students want to talk about, in come the supplementary materials. So in the forward, they say, if American teachers were broadly educated and deeply knowledgeable about the subjects for which, they're responsible, including history, it wouldn't really be as big a problem, but we know they're not. We know we're not going and getting history majors who are really well educated or have master's degrees in history to teach history. It's just not what's happening. And most of them either majored in something else, they majored in, one topic, a little, whatever, and then they decide to go to teacher college where they don't teach you subject matter expertise at all. And so it's a rare person teaching social studies or history who's actually steeped in history, steeped in it well enough to recognize when someone hands them a piece of material to teach in a classroom, well, that's bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, you give them whether it's a lesson plan or some professional development or whatever, that they'd be able to look at it and quickly spot the inaccuracies. So they're not. They say the sad reality is many of our history teachers don't know enough history. This won't surprise any of you, right? Thus, those teachers that seek to use their textbooks as a crutch to help fill in gaps in their own knowledge are not doing right by their students. So it's like they're relying on a textbook, and that means they're relying on the accuracy of that textbook. And textbooks already, we know, are, as I said, they're written once for a certain number of years. The school board or whoever approves it, or the district or the state approves the textbook they're going to use, and you're off to the races. Whether it's the most accurate thing or not, we don't know. Whether it's up to date, it could be, it could not be. It doesn't make it the be all end all. But it's certainly, if the teacher's relying on that, they're not going to catch if there are inaccuracies. And then if there are gaps within what the textbook can cover, like I said, September 11 happens and you're like, I want to teach something about Islam, or, there's a lot going on. The kids are asking me questions. We're, under some pressure to teach some things. I don't know. So you're going to go looking for these supplementary materials. So that reality has led to the development of this huge cottage industry in our primary and secondary education system, designed to supply history and social studies teachers with pre-digested supplemental materials and professional development. Okay. And do you think there might be some self-interested groups out there who are only too happy to provide those supplementary materials? Do you think that the fact that both No Child Left Behind and Common Core permit teachers to go and cover things, and districts and schools and superintendents to be, you just need to cover the topics? They don't specify a materials standard. They don't specify what truth is about history. They just say, teach this history. So then it comes down to who's your supplier of the material. So they say that, this enterprise began with the best of intentions. Maybe, I don't know. I don't agree, but okay. To escort youngsters safely through the thicket of political correctness and ethnic politics that now surrounds such formerly benign holidays as Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, we simply assume that teachers need help. Because at the same time that this was all happening with Common Core and so forth, we have all this political correctness stuff and multiculturalism and teachers who don't know a lot of history. So it's like, I don't know a lot of history. There's, oh my God, it's a landmine. I might be offending somebody, and I'm under pressure from political groups as a school board or a school district. And it is, oh my God, what am I going to do? So we don't live in that perfect world. So we attempt to compensate and backfill. Innumerable organizations and agencies, public and private, large and small, commercial and nonprofit, are engaged in creating the creation and delivery of supplemental instruction materials and in-service education or professional development for teachers. Some is subsidized by tax dollars or philanthropy, and some is baldly commercial. They just sell it. Like Teachers Pay Teachers, or they just go out there and, sell it to the school district and say it's great, whatever, it's going to make everybody happy. Evidence of quality and effectiveness generated either by the suppliers themselves or by evaluators trying to assure school administrators that they got their money's worth is what the evidence is, that it works. They make their own evidence. Castle does this too. Second Step does this too. Like all the SEL companies, I keep telling people they evidence-based, so it's very self-serving. They produce the evidence. Be not misled. The truth is that this is a vast, dark continent within our public and private education system. Yes, private also. We parents, even teachers, even heads of school, don't 100% know everything that's coming into the classroom, how accurate it is, how good it is, who made it, why they made it, unless they're going to sit down and look at every single thing and go to the teacher every single day and say, what did you use? Let me see it. And I'm not saying there are no administrators who do this or no, lead teachers who do this. There might be. I'm telling you that we don't have a standard operating procedure in American education across the board that says you must. Doesn't exist. So in the absence of you must, it's anything goes. Cover the material. All right. So the creation and dissemination of the materials has fallen into the eager hands of interest groups and ideologues yearning to use America's public school classrooms to shape the minds of tomorrow's citizens by manipulating what today's teachers are introducing into the lessons of today's children. The K-12 history and social studies curriculum was being subtly politicized by adult interests working outside the more closely scrutinized domains of statewide standards, textbooks, pre-service teacher preparation, state certification, etc. Remember, this paper was produced in the early 2000s. So the woman who wrote this, her last name is Stotsky, seems to have uncovered the reverse phenomenon: instructional materials and professional development that, because they fly under the radar, are free to promulgate bias, misinformation, and politically charged conclusions, but never, acknowledging their semi-covert agendas that just proliferated. That's what she discovered. She's like, where is all this coming from? As she was in Massachusetts Department of Education, she's like, wait, stop, pause. What is this? And she's looking at materials and saying, like, this isn't even right. This is false. These are a lot. Wait, whoa, hold on. And then she started looking into this. So ill mapped is this continent, meaning the body of this kind of content, that one doesn't even know its full dimensions, much less what roads or rivers will carry one across it. That was then. Imagine now, with the internet and everything at your disposal that you can produce like that. So Stotsky separated this content into two parts, one dealing with supplemental materials, the other with professional development workshops, which are the most frequent vehicle for dissemination of the supplemental materials. And she found plenty to lament in both areas. Under the guise of heightening teachers and students' awareness of previously marginalized groups, they manipulate teachers and thus their pupils to view the history of freedom as the history of oppression and to be more sympathetic to cultures that don't value individual rights than those that do. So as she's looking through all the supplemental material, she realized that the groups that were the most prolific, that spent the most money, that put the most time and effort and energy into just promulgating the most stuff, were the ones seeking to denigrate the West and freedom and individual liberty and make themselves look really good and oppressed. Better educated teachers ought not be equated with more time at ed school, though, maybe not even on the university campus. So just so you know, just because they went to ed school doesn't make them better educated. People can also teach themselves history, pick it up from their reading, the History Channel, even movies. The key is to insist that however they learn it, tomorrow's teachers must know it and demonstrate before confronting children in the classroom. We have no means of doing this. We have not had a means of doing this since I don't know, go back pretty far. Now, ironically, in Massachusetts, I did take a test to become certified in literature to teach at the middle and high school level when I was living in Boston. And they did test my knowledge of literature to a pretty decent degree. Now, I passed the test and I was certified to teach literature in Massachusetts at that time. But and they might have had something for history as well. This was in the late 1990s. But to my knowledge, this is not, that was high school and middle school specifically for literature. Like I took that test, English literature. Now they have it ELA and social studies. So I don't know if they're still doing it. And honestly, literature is, history would be very different. Like what facts are they going to put in there? For me, it was like, what kind of poem, structure is this? And, which of the writers wrote this? It was that kind of thing. So now I'm going to go skip ahead to what they said in this paper about the specific stuff around the curriculum that pushed the anti-Semitism or that type of thing. Remembering again that this goes back to, I wish I had the exact date. I feel like this is, where does it say? Sandra Stotsky. This is her thing. I feel like it's 2003, but I'm probably going to get that wrong. All right. Early part, 20 years ago, effectively. So I'm going to go forward to, all right, where was it? Facing history and ourselves. Here we go. Possibly the most malevolent of the organizations professing to address citizenship education is Facing History and Ourselves, which provides materials and services to over 16,000 teachers, ostensibly to help them address racism, anti-Semitism, and violence. Isn't that ironic? The goal of it was to address anti-Semitism. It reaches over 1.5 million adolescents through its teacher network and over 4,500 schools through regional offices in 6 major cities in the US. In addition, it now has an office in Europe. Facing History and Ourselves describes itself as an interdisciplinary approach to citizenship education and can be taught over a long or short period of time and at any grade level, although it's usually taught in grades 8 or 9. The central problem with this organization's activities stems not from its efforts to provide students with scrupulously accurate information about the Holocaust from its goal of teaching contemporary civic lessons for American students. To do so, it makes false analogies to a catastrophic historical event, thus trivializing the catastrophe and setting up a moral equivalence between Nazis and white Americans. We call this, in terms of anti-Semitism, Holocaust equivocation, or in some cases, Holocaust inversion. In this case, it's equivocation. When you decide that you're going to use the Holocaust to say, and this is just like that. It is a form of anti-Semitism in and of itself, because you are sort of like negating the uniqueness of that experience or the fact that it was mostly targeted at eradicating the Jews from the face of the earth. That's not to say they weren't also killing gays and Jehovah's Witnesses and, Seventh-day Adventists and other, Roma people, to say that the goal was to eradicate this tiny minority from the planet, wherever they were. Okay, it says it makes explicit and frequent comparisons not only between 20th century America and 20th century Germany. How ludicrous is that? But also between 19th century America and 19th century Germany. In essence, it uses the Holocaust to portray America's blacks as Europe's Jews. They're like the same. That's the Holocaust equivocation, or equivalency, rather. Thereby reducing genocide to an act of bigotry and equating white Americans to Nazis. So, and they'll justify it by saying, but slavery was really, really awful. Yes, of course it was. No one's saying otherwise. But they're not analogous. And they deserve to be taught differently, and they deserve to have their own space to be taught. Pulling them together doesn't serve any noble purpose. It doesn't help the former slave, or it doesn't help Black Americans or our understanding of the experience of slavery, American slavery, nor does it help understand the roots of dehumanization of the Jews that led to the Holocaust. In fact, I would argue it makes both of those things less comprehensible to the student. And the only thing they're left with is these things are both bad, and because white people. That's what I think their takeaway is. They don't, especially 8th and 9th graders, do not have the ability to sort of suss out all the little nuances and subtleties and differences between these two things that are not analogous at all. And so the goal, I believe, is to have them just come away saying America bad, white people bad. Or white people really, really potentially bad, like at any moment. All right. It says, it's difficult for outsiders to find out what takes place in facing history workshops. Only teachers from the schools that have arranged and paid for the workshops can attend. The website that enables the teachers to exchange ideas is password protected. So this is back then. And even now, I'm going to show you the website today, because this website, this curriculum still exists. And here it is. Responding to rising anti-Semitism. You think, oh, well, that's good, right, Deb? Isn't that good? They're addressing it, right? Well, no, not really. It's not, because you don't have to go very far before you start getting to things about equity and, the Black experience and so on and so forth. Promoting democracy, see our impact, et cetera. In fact, if we go to this and I type in equity, what do we get? Teaching for Equity and Justice, 5 ways to ground your teaching in equity and justice. Reflections on the Teaching for Equity and Justice Summit. Teaching for Equity and Justice empowers educators. So everything about anti-Semitism in this curriculum is through that equity lens. So what you come away with in the end is that, yes, anti-Semitism is terrible. We have to make sure that people know the difference between the good Jews and the bad Jews. And who do you think are the good Jews? The ones who oppose the horrible genocide against the Palestinians. Those are the good Jews who understand that equity equals support the good guys and not the bad guys, even if the bad guys are from your own group. That's what that is. And there is another article from the blogger that I mentioned, and it's called "Why Do So Many Jewish Students Support the Genocide of Jews?" This is a great supplement to this conversation. This will explain to you how those students respond to things like this and come away rejecting Zionism, rejecting, being sort of anti-Semitic against their own people, their own culture, and supporting Hamas because equity. So that article explains that, but I'm not going to go into that. I just wanted to show you this particular, this curriculum. So then getting back to the paper, that's the worst one. That's the one that they said was like really the worst example of this bad history stuff. So then moving on to Islamic and Islamic history. And you might wonder, well, how bad could it possibly be? Right? And it says the traditional history curriculum has been faulted for concentrating almost solely on the history of the Western world, Greece, Rome, etc. To help American students become more familiar with other cultures, civilizations, and regions, and thus less ethnocentric, history teachers who tend to have been trained chiefly in Western or U.S. history and whose textbooks often have a similar focus have had to draw on these additional resources. So this great, vast continent of supplemental materials that have very loose quality assurance, if any, produced by self-interested NGOs and interest groups and political action committees and so on, are all they have to go to for this multicultural stuff. That's where ethnic studies came from, as supplementary materials. And now even states are adopting it because they've spent the most time and money on it, and they've lobbied politicians, gotten people elected to office, so they'll turn around and buy the stuff that they created. So it says, this is especially the case for addressing Islam, the Islamic world, and the Middle East. I describe here 3 egregious sets of curriculum materials. All 3 falsify history in their attempt to indoctrinate both teachers and students. And you might wonder, well, what do you mean falsify history? So we're going to go down to some of the lies. So here's one. This says, this was something called the Notebook. It's one of the pieces of curriculum or propaganda that was published in Berkeley, California, edited by Audrey Shabazz, who's still the editor, director of a group called AWARE, et cetera. And it stated, among other non-facts, that Yasser Arafat was president of a newly declared state of Palestine, that the United Nations General Assembly had voted to recognize the state in 1988, and that the Canaanites were the ancestors of present-day Palestinians. Now imagine, there you are, you're a teacher. You don't know squat about the modern Middle East. You don't even know anything about the ancient Middle East. And you get this professional development class, and they sit there and they tell you these things, and you don't know any different. So of course you think this is true. And of course you're going to go into the class and you're going to teach it to your students. I will paraphrase or quote briefly from William Bonetta's preliminary report and correspondence on the content of the current version of the notebook. This report may be read in its entirety, et cetera, et cetera. Bonetta concluded the principal purpose of the 1998 notebook, now 513 pages long, is to induce teachers to embrace Islamic religious beliefs, support political views favored by MEPC and AWARE, these are pro-Islamic groups, and disseminate those religious beliefs and political views in their classrooms. In fact, they had a section called Early Muslim Exploration worldwide. It says evidence of Muslims in the New World before Columbus. The article claims that Muslims from Europe were the first to sail across the Atlantic and land in the New World, starting in 889. Not to be outdone by any of the early European explorers, the article claims that West African Muslims not only spread throughout South and Central America, but also had reached Canada, intermarrying with the Iroquois and Algonquin nations, so that much later, early English explorers were to meet Iroquois and Algonquin chiefs with names like Abdul Rahim and Abdallah ibn Malik. This is in teaching materials. The idea that English explorers met native Indian chiefs with Muslim names in the middle of the Northeast woodlands sounds almost like something a Hollywood film writer dreamed up for a spoof. What's more astonishing about this historical information is that it seems not to have been recognized as fake history by all the satisfied teachers that MEPC claims have participated in its workshops over the years. So again, 20 years ago, imagine how many thousands of teachers went to these workshops, digested this stuff. This was very interesting and wonderful. Checked off that they were satisfied, went back to class and taught this crap to their students who are now history teachers. Not all of them, but some of them. Okay. So imagine that. Imagine that this is what you think you know. The current version of the notebook continues the practice that CQE noted in 1990, no evidence or documentation to support key historical facts that serve to advance their political views or religious beliefs. One can only wonder if this has ever been questioned by the teachers who use the materials, or if they feel they must agree with any claim made by Muslims as an alternative perspective, or risk being labeled insensitive, Eurocentric, or racist. Interestingly, this particular bit of fake history may soon be cleaned up at the request of the Algonquin Nation itself. In 2003, the Algonquin Nation Secretariat in Quebec became aware of the academic travesty being committed in its name and issued an alert on November 28, 2003 to state that there is no credible evidence to support these theories in the archival record, academic study, or in oral history. and that we are extremely concerned that such nonsense would be circulated as curriculum intended for use in schools. The Secretariat calls upon the sponsors of the Arab World Studies Notebook to render an explanation and an apology for material that is so patently untrue and academically indefensible. So, there's that. Um, Pirates' Dev's vein is going to lose it. Ho tight little vein. Which one? Is it this one? Is it this one? I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I oh God. The modern Middle East. All right. So the modern Middle East is a supplemental curriculum has been approved by the California State Department of Education for purchase with state funds. Now remember, California had to Jewish residents of California, amongst others, had to push back hard a few years ago against the ethnic studies curriculum that was being voted on, and they were deciding if there was going to be which one was going to be the mandatory ethnic studies curriculum for graduation, which, by the way, they have. And it was extremely like anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, as Palestinians are the victims. There's such a thing as Palestine, that historically, like all kinds of misinformation, but heavily anti-Zionist and anti-Israel. People had to push back that it was extremely biased, etc. And they only got the worst of the worst removed. It's still pretty anti-Israel, but not as bad as it was. Well, this goes back 20 years ago that they approved a curriculum that, the Jewish community at the time said, this is a bit much, even then. Here's some examples. So they had, let's see, this material is published in Rancho Cordova, California by Teachers Curriculum Institute, an organization whose self-description is drenched in constructivist jargon. TCI publishes history and social studies curricula, History Alive for grades 5 through 12, and Social Studies Alive for K2. That use an approach to learning consisting of a series of instructional practices that allows students with multiple intelligences to experience history. Sounds like how they talk about math now, to experience math. Not learn it, experience it. According to its publisher, the goal of this curriculum is to engage students in the history of the Middle East through the process of self-discovery and interactive pedagogy. That's a whole lot of words to say bullshit. The JCRC deemed this curriculum used in some local high schools in the Bay Area and also in Chicago to contain so many inaccuracies on the Arab-Israeli conflict, as well as unethical teaching methods, that it cannot be fixed and should not be used. For example, it erroneously asserts that the Arabs of Israel-Palestine are indigenous to that area and trace their roots back to the Philistines. No. Unlike the Notebook, which claims the Canaanites as their ancestors. One learning activity designed to prepare students for the lessons on the Arab-Israeli conflict divides students into two groups, one called JEDs and the other PADs, representing Jews and Palestinians in the early 20th century. The teacher is told to arrange the furniture in the classroom so the PADs are crowded in a small space into which the JEDs demand to enter. Assuming the role of the great power, the teacher is told to favor the JED's arguments and ignore the PAD's seemingly reasonable opposition to the JED's entry. The obvious purpose of the activity is to elicit students' feelings about the unfair treatment according to the PADs and to predispose them to be sympathetic, empathetic to one side and negative to the other before they've learned anything about the actual conflict. So aside from the historical inaccuracies, we set up a completely unethical activity that elicits emotions, creates a sense of empathy towards the good guys, which are the oppressed, the bad guys, obviously representing the Jews. And this is 20 years ago. In response to a parent complaint about this material, the Santa Rosa School District convened a committee of district teachers to review it. According to a JCRC staffer, the committee expressed significant concerns about the materials, but, there shouldn't be a but, decided that the curriculum could be used if it were balanced with other materials. Who's checking on that? And what other materials? Who gets to decide what the balance? These are wrong, but let's put some other stuff and they'll be fine. Although I suspect that teachers were reluctant to make a negative judgment about the information and curricular materials supposedly reviewed by scholars, especially on a controversial topic, Their rationale warrants comment. It suggests that it doesn't matter if facts are mingled with non-facts and an unscrupulous pedagogy to boot, so long as the mixture fairly reflects a contribution from all relevant parties. In other words, perspective taking, empathy. What's your perspective? It's this. Totally false. Made it all up. Came out of my head. Feels good. It's what was passed down from my ancestors who also made shit up. But it's my perspective. Take it. Oh, if I'm going to be a good person, I will take your perspective in. And it is equally valid as the perspective of these people who give me archaeological evidence, historical facts, scholarly material going back thousands of years, P.S. the Bible. Even if you don't agree that it's 100% historically accurate, there's plenty that's been validated by archaeological digs, etc. The Romans, Babylonians, Persians, their records. No, Ottoman Turks, their record. No, they don't count either. All that history. No, see, if teachers knew their history, they would look at this and go, "This is whack. This is false." If I were in that classroom and they handed it to me with my background in history, such as it is, I would have taken one look at it and gone, "Are you serious? The Philistines? The Canaanites? What?" But they don't know. And then if you add on top of that, I don't want to look like a bad person. I don't want to not have empathy. They think it's true. Empathy is the highest good. Equity is the highest good. Equal outcomes is the highest good. There's not equal outcomes. These people have a thriving state. These people live in squalor. They must be the good guys. It doesn't matter if it's really true. It's their perspective. And then listen to how they teach Islam and ask yourself if you could get away with teaching Christianity or Judaism the same way in American classroom. So here are some activities from Islam assimilation of Islamic history and culture. The students were asked to simulate becoming Muslims. They've also falsified history. Students were told to pretend they were living in the time of Muhammad. Form teams representing early Islamic cities such as Jerusalem and Cordova, and are to engage in a camel caravan race from Cordova to Mecca. It's not clear why students start from Cordova, Benedetta points out, since the Muslim invasion of Spain didn't take place until the 8th century, nor how the camels will cross the Straits of Gibraltar. But these are minor problems, and what Benedetta documents is a web of outright lies and other devices for deceiving students. These students don't even know geography, apparently. Or they'd go, how am I riding a camel across the Straits of Gibraltar? They don't know. The manual acknowledges that 2 Muslim agencies were involved in the development of this program, the Islamic Education and Information Center in San Jose and the Council on Islamic Education in Los Angeles. In Benetta's judgment, Islam Assimilation is nothing but a religious publication designed to use unsuspecting classroom teachers as agents for propagating Islam. Could you get away with this with teachers who knew a damn thing about history? No, you could not. So there is that. Anyway, so that is, these are just some of the other activities. 2 teachers spanning grades 5 through 8 plan to have their students begin the study of Islamic history, culture, and traditions by reading and discussing a poem written by an Oklahoma teacher called The Angel of the East. The poem is about an angel of the Middle East who seeks a new world order and peace. The outline of this imagined angel, like a constellation in the sky, is projected onto a map of the 15 countries in the Middle East with its heart located in Jerusalem. How many times is Jerusalem mentioned in the Quran? Anyone know? Anyone know? I'm sure your students don't know. 0. Big fat goose egg. But these students who were in that class would never know that. Called Salat in the classroom mosque, this middle school project is described this way. Students will be working in groups of 4 to create wall decorations and prayer rugs. Students will create large geometric patterns on bulletin board paper. The patterns will include calligraphic writings, and the designs will be based on designs found in the Tent Maker project, which provides an excellent concept of Islamic art. While creating large wall decorations, they'll independently be creating and designing their prayer rug. Once they finish their prayer rug, they will create the room to feel like a mosque. Grade 9 project focuses on the life and teachings of Muhammad, the spread of Islam, the influence of the Arabic language on science, medicine, and food, the Muslim Renaissance, etc. And then this one, This is what really stands out to me. As the summaries here in Appendix B suggest, most proposed lessons and curricular units were academically weak, contained little history. If the teachers planned to teach any history, it was early Islamic history. Few addressed Islamic history from 1500 on, you know, the murder and rapey part. No matter what history they proposed to teach, not one proposed project would help students understand 9/11 and why so many Muslims hate America. Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism, not touched. The lack of democracy in the Muslim world. The lack of basic legal and political rights for women and LGBT, whatever. The lack of a free press in most of the Muslim world, the deplorable state of elementary, secondary, and higher education in the Muslim world, and the dramatic decline in intellectual creativity and scientific achievement in the Muslim world since 1500. Was the orientation of this institute simply a reflection of these people's intentions? Certainly, it's not easy to discern much influence on teachers' projects from the lectures on Islamic history given by the scholars. And by the way, these scholars were from Harvard who taught this professional development. So it may be that the teachers are like, they're from Harvard. They must know. I don't know. I went to Podunk Teacher College. Or even if they went to Columbia, they might be like, well, they came from Harvard and they're scholars and they're Islamic and I'm not. So it must be true. Did the teachers generally ignore what the scholars had presented when presenting the projects, or did the scholars give talks aimed chiefly at religious and cultural appreciation of Islam, not academic analysis, because they were addressing public school teachers whom they perceive as incapable of analytical thinking about historical movements, events, and individuals? I'm going to go with that one. The Harvard scholars, I believe, knew perfectly well these elementary and middle and high school teachers didn't know their history, weren't going to challenge them, weren't going to have the guts or the knowledge to challenge them. And so they never presented any historical fact. They just presented Muslim appreciation, Islam appreciation, and go do these activities in your classes. And they went, okay, this will be very multicultural. I'll do it. Either not realizing or not caring that they were going to predispose their students, who are now grown-up adults, to seeing, Islam good, Judaism bad, Christianity bad, America bad. It's striking that the teachers so readily accepted as facts the people of the book refers to Muslims as well as Christians and Jews. No, it doesn't. That the Quran includes the Old Testament. That was included in their thing. That the Quran includes the Old Testament. Not true. And that Jerusalem is a major Muslim city in the 7th and 8th centuries. False. They accepted it. This must be true. They didn't have any basis to understand otherwise. And again, a lot of them were educated in American schools even 20 years before that, where you're not allowed to teach religious history, or weren't. That's verboten. Separation of church and state. So they have nothing to compare it to. I'm very lucky. I went to private school, secular though it was. We had to take religion as a humanities course. You didn't graduate unless you read the Bible as a book. So you could understand art and literature and poetry and history. How are you going to really understand the Crusades? How are you really going to understand anything about the even the Roman Empire and its rise and fall and what happened next? And how are you going to understand all this? The Holy Roman Empire thereafter. How would you understand that? Their frame of reference was religious. Nope, can't teach that. But we can teach this. Make prayer rugs. That's fine. The almost complete absence of interest in the status of women in Islamic societies and the teachers' proposals, and the total lack of interest in slavery and the Islamic slave trade. That was another thing that stood out to them. Not one teacher proposed to engage students in a cross-cultural comparison of women's roles or a comparison of the transatlantic slave trade with the trans-African slave trade, not even mentioned. But meanwhile, the one I showed you, that curriculum talking about, we have to look at equity, et cetera. Remember that one? All about, we got to equate the Holocaust with slavery. Well, that's interesting. What's about the trans-Africa slave trade? The one that went up that way. Can't talk about that? No, America bad. Most striking of all are the unethical teaching practices these public school teachers are proposing or are conducting already in their classrooms. If any teacher asks students to write down and memorize the 10 Commandments, listen to the Torah being chanted, study the religious practices of Hasidic Jews, and prepare a public presentation dressed in men's Sabbath garb or women's Sabbath dress and wig, People for the American Way, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and the ACLU would descend upon them like the Furies. Does anyone doubt it? Anyone doubt it? There's no chance you're going to have let's learn about what it's like to pray in a synagogue. You know what? Let's make a tallis. They made prayer rugs. Let's make a tallis. Let's make yarmulkes. Let's decorate the room to look like the inside of a temple. What? This would never happen. But the mosque, that's fine. There seemed to be total disconnect in their thinking between the kind of learning activities they would plan to help students understand the beliefs and practices of other religions and what they seem eager to have students understand Islam. So that's the end of that. Okay. And that's what I wanted to show you is that happened. That's what they observed 20 years ago. Nothing changed. Literally nothing changed. This was surface. People did all this work. They said, hey, there's a giant cottage industry with all these supplemental materials for history to be taught in the classroom at the teacher's whim, at the school's whim. It's mostly produced by self-interested groups who have an extreme bias. It's leaning towards this like equity is the highest value and, this anti-Western slant, pro-Islamic slant. A lot of it is produced by Muslim organizations that are obviously biased against Israel and Jews and so on. Maybe we should do that. Nah. Now it's only worse. It's only gotten worse. So that is how essentially you end up with situations like this. California high school students staging pro-Hamas walkouts after textbooks instill anti-Israel, pro-jihad views. So this is, here they are. These are students today in Oakland, California. Remember, that's 20 years ago. And I read to you about California. Carrying signs reading Free Palestine and chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will free. They know literally nothing about the history of the Middle East that is true. Everything they think they know about the history of that region is false. They were wearing keffiyeh. I mean, look at this. Look at this ridiculousness. Okay, march through the halls, clenched fists, screaming the same slogan. They did not come to these views on their own. They've been fed a steady diet of anti-Semitism and hatred of Christian values in their schools from their teachers and in their textbooks. It's just been going on ever since. This is what this is what comes of empathy plus this crazy curriculum, supplemental materials fed in to emphasize which is the in group and which is the out group. Must have empathy for this group. Demand that Israel stop bombing Gaza. Where's the demand to return the hostages? Not there. And you know why it's not there? Because the hostages, if they even believe they exist, because most of them, to continue to be the compassionate, empathetic ones, have kind of said that doesn't exist. They're not real. That's propaganda. There are no hostages. This was resistance. And if you finally show them, any evidence that they're hostages, well, they should have known better. They shouldn't be there in the first place. They're in the wrong place and they shouldn't be there. And therefore it's justified. Doesn't, even if there's a hostage, it's for a good reason. Like they come up with any justification because they have to, you see, because their identity as a good person, as an empathetic person is tied up with supporting the in-group. You don't feel empathy for both sides. You can't. The slogans the students chanted through the halls, outside their classrooms, etc., are anti-Semitic. The chant from the river to the sea, we know what that means. We talked about it, and so on. So you might wonder about the materials used today. They're in the article, provided by a whistleblower who had access to these things. So here's from a textbook. I'm going to see if I can make it any bigger. Okay, see, there you go. Spread influence of Islam. Now, I would expect to see that it was spread, by force. because it was. It spread east across South Asia. Da, da, da. It moved north, like all by itself. It expanded rapidly. Doesn't say how. Islam was a missionary religion. That's fascinating. A missionary religion. Yes. By the sword. That's missionary now. I'm really glad that Christian missionaries don't run around with, scimitars. Um, Sought to win converts, particularly in areas where polytheism prevailed. Although Muslims sometimes waged holy war, that's downplaying it. Clashing with followers of other religions, they also respected Christians and Jews as people of faith and often lived alongside them in peace. Lie. You know what peace and living alongside looked like? You can pay a tax. You can pay a special tax and be a dhimmi. And then you get to be a Jew or you get to be a Christian. And we'll leave you alone, but you pay the tax. And you better ride a donkey when I ride a horse. And you better get off your donkey and get down on your knees if I'm walking by, because you can't be taller or higher than I am, as I'm the Muslim and I'm the preferred group and you're not. That's what dhimmitude is. But it's peaceful. It's very peaceful when you submit. If you want to be something other than a second class citizen, then maybe not so much peace for you. Muslim armies did not usually force the peoples they conquered to convert to Islam, but over time, most people in these lands converted to the new faith. Well, that's just flagrantly false. Flagrantly false. They would come in making it clear, we're in charge now and we will kill you if you try to assert that you're equal to us in terms of religion. You're not. We're in charge now. Submit. We won't kill you if you pay the tax and submit. And, you can be one of us if you want to convert and reject your culture of origin, then that's okay too. But that is how they did it. They just didn't come in and make it optional. And it says Sharia continues to develop in response to modern ways of life. Listen to that. It continues to develop in response to modern ways of life and its challenges. Really? That's how it develops? So in Afghanistan, they decided to force the girls out of the schools again after we left because modern life and, the challenges it presents. That's why the Taliban said you can't go to school anymore because, modern life is too challenging. No school for you, little girl. Okay, that's fascinating. Meanwhile, look at all of this. And when you read the text and then you look at the map, if you believe, well, this was all people chose this. They chose this. Oh, look, these are the only battle sites. What? Yeah, what they don't tell you is there's not people here in the middle of the desert. These are where people were. They're battle sites because people didn't want to be Muslim or run by Muslims. And then we get down to here. I love this. Islamic law, Sharia. The search to understand God's law is Sharia. Really? Is that what it is? The search to understand God's law. Sharia covers Muslims' duties towards God and others. What? For example, the Quran tells women not to display their beauty to strangers. For this reason, Muslim women usually wear various forms of modest dress, with most women covering their arms and legs. Many also wear scarves over their hair. Others cover themselves from head to toe. They act like it's guidance, not a set of rules that, if you don't follow this, you're going to be in big trouble. Of jihad, which is at the center of Islam and is laid out in the Quran, the textbook reads, the term jihad refers to the effort that Muslims perform to become closer to God. Really? Well, I guess Hamas thinks it makes them very close to God to rape and kill people. A vast majority emphasize a spiritual inner struggle, but a minority of individuals and groups claim to fulfill this duty through acts of violence. Only a minority. Let's see, just a little tiny group. Okay. In the Quran, however, jihad comes in phases based on the social position of Muslims in a nation or region. It's essentially a playbook with the eventual goal of expanding Islamic military strength to overtake, subjugate, and force non-Muslims to pay tribute to Islam. Only 4 days before the recent attack on Israel by Hamas, Iran's supreme leader called for jihad. I don't think he was calling for individual struggle, like inside yourself. Hamas's former leader, speaking from Qatar, called for jihad only a few days after the attacks. The concept of jihad is downplayed in the textbooks for American students, which is what makes it so easy for them to believe the Islamic extremists in Gaza are the victims and Americans and Israelis are the aggressors. In fact, encouraging a populace to believe exactly that is the form of jihad practiced when Muslims are in the social minority. It said so. It says so. If you read their writings, it says when you're in the minority, when you lack power, lie. Only when you are in a position of power do you tell the truth. The Quran says we smile in the face of some people, but in our hearts we curse them. The outward message is tolerance, while inwardly the goal is radicalization. By the 19th century, Muslim regions had come under European rule, and Western codes of law soon replaced Sharia, except in matters of family law. Sharia continues to develop. Many Muslims feel that democracy and freedom do not contradict the teachings of law of Islam, but others feel the two cannot go hand in hand. Many others, many others. This is what they say. They go through jihad. They really soft pedal it, you guys. So is it any wonder our kids don't know? They're not being told the truth. They're not even being told another version of the story. So it's not like, even if you wanted to argue with me and you wanted to say, well, Deb, why should they, you want them to teach your version of things, what jihad is and what Sharia law is and what the history of the Middle East is. Well, yeah, I do. I happen to think mine is more accurate. But let's say you wanted to teach both of these side by side and let the kids decide. They're not even doing that. They're not even presenting them going, well, one side says this and one side says that, and here's their evidence and here's their evidence. Pick. That's not even happening. And you would need very skillful teachers to be able to do that. Teachers who know an awful lot about how to choose the materials, how to select the best of the best from both sides so that you are presenting apples and apples. Actual historical artifacts, not perspectives and, perceptions and stories and different intelligences, but actual historical evidence. So let me go through some of your comments. Thank you so much for making all these comments and being patient with me. Lovmo says, just read the Quran yourself, especially Surah 16. The Jewish texts are Star Wars. Christian Bible is Empire Strikes Back. And the Quran wants to be Return of the Jedi, but ends up being Spaceballs. I have never heard that analogy, and I love it. That's fascinating. I'm going to have to go think about that one for a while. But thank you very much for the comment. That's really, really clever. A Baker says, this is the kind of research I can't do now that I'm back working. I knew things were off the rails when I looked into the fingerprint scanners they implemented into our, well, I'm sorry, what? I mean, I knew they're doing biometric stuff, but like they have fingerprint scanners in the elementary schools. Wow. Okay. That's a new one for me. A Baker, where are you located? What state? Let me know in the comments. Yeah, that's a big yikes, ego brain. Fingerprint scanners. Holy cow. So Major Allen Espy, she upload her live shows to her channel? Are you talking about me? This is on the channel after the live ends. It's just there to be replayed. So it's there. It's also on Rumble. It's airing live on Rumble and it will be there after the fact. Let's see. Yes, garbage in, garbage out, Dion. Very true. And then A Baker says, yes, scanners for their little fingers. After spending hours reading fine print and privacy agreements, I found the data goes to China. Again, not surprised, but wow, that you were able to find it out. Says, thanks. That can be a big reason why there aren't a lot of live viewers. It could be, but I know most people who do lives also have the replays immediately. I don't get a lot of live viewers because I don't know, other reasons. I'm not sure why. I don't. Maybe people just don't like me. I've been told I'm not likable, so it's possible. There could be any number of reasons. Some people find me. Let's see, what have I gotten? I'm abrasive. I'm arrogant. Somebody doesn't like it when I go into my little Valley Girl voice when I'm making fun of the teachers or the people. People like what they like. They don't like what they don't like. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, so you are in Hewitt, Texas, and a fingerprint scanner is going to China? Wow, that's yeah. Do I know Lloyd DeJong? I do not. Should I? How do I get in touch with Lloyd DeJong? Why should I know Lloyd DeJong? I don't. Okay, so and then thank you. So Sophia says yes, Deb streams with the DVR option, so her live will be immediately available when the stream ends. Yes, I do that. I mostly do this live because you guys have like the wonderful comment about Star Wars. Love that. People have things they want to say. They want to participate in this. Sometimes people bring me content or names or things I should read, and I find it very helpful to respond to that and answer questions or bring people in with their comments. And but ultimately this content is out there to educate people about what's happening. I'm getting educated while I'm doing this. Like the research I did for it teaches me some things I didn't know before, some things I did know, but like the paper from 20 years ago, I didn't know that existed until today. I don't know everything. Like I'm still trying to catch up just like you guys. And the whistleblower that I met online through my platforms who pointed me to the blog article also shared with me this paper and said, "Have you seen this?" No, I haven't seen this. Thank you. So I put it together. This is how these people are now the teacher's age. Even the whistleblower is like, "Oh my God, that's a good point." They were in school 20 years ago. Some of them are probably teaching or at least walking the earth, believing this stuff, and maybe they have kids, and so their kids go to school and the kids are being taught this crap and they come home with it and the parent doesn't know to challenge it. The parent's like, "Yeah, that's what I learned. It sounds right." And maybe the parent's even perpetuating it. Who knows? If you don't independently research history, you get all you got is what you learned in school. So there's that. But I make it available right away because it is what it is. Thank you, Major Alan Espy. I appreciate that. Welcome to the channel. And thank you, Ego Brain. I thought the Valley Girl thing was kind of funny too, but some people don't like it. They're like, you lose a lot of credibility when you go into that voice. And I imagine them talking that way in my head when they're probably not. They're probably like, you lose a lot of credibility. Well, whatever. I want to show you guys a couple other resources that I have that I think might interest you as parents or even just people. Next year, in my homeschooling of my teenager, we'll be doing American history. She'll be a junior in high school. Theoretically, that will be the year, supposedly. And I got this book, Whatever Happened to Justice? And this is an Uncle Eric book, it says, okay, by Richard Mayberry. And I love this book because it kind of, when I was talking about how empathy is not a moral value, equity is not a moral value, these are not, principles before perspectives. I'd love to make that stick, somehow. Mayberry challenges the reader to explore the inextricable connection between law and economics. So first of all, the first premise of this book is that, we talk so much about economics, capitalism versus mixed economy, socialism, communism. And the point made here is if you have the right law in the first place, which we had with the Bill of Rights and their Constitution, and too bad they changed, right to own property to pursuit of happiness. That was a little bit of a mistake, in my opinion. And they left some stuff out of the Bill of Rights that probably should have been in there. That if you don't have a law that respects property rights, you're halfway to tyranny already. So you can, obviously the right to life is the first and most important right. But what is property anyway? Property is your life made tangible, made manifest, your life's energy, your effort, your talent, all the things that you do and, make happen are your property. Even if someone in your family did that and left it to you, it's still somebody's life made tangible, measurable. Okay. And it's yours. So if the government or anybody else can capriciously or even legally or anything come and expropriate that from you by any means, other than, you stole it, it's not yours, or, you committed some horrible crime or whatever, if they can just justify taking it, they can justify taking everything else from you, everything, your liberty. And it's written in an epistolary format. So, letters. And the first chapter right here is the cause is law. And I would maintain that that's what we're seeing right now with this empathy thing, is that we've gotten so far away from respecting the law. And by the law, I mean literally the Bill of Rights, civil rights, the basics, the core basics. We're so far away from that. As soon as you can say that equity is a moral value that you uphold as the highest one, and you are teaching that to your children, you have effectively voided the Constitution, because the Constitution stands in opposition to that principle. It quite literally says you have political equality and you're equal under the law, but in order to be equal under the law, you're going to have unequal outcomes. You just are. You just are, because you can't, the only way you could have equal outcomes is to be unequal under the law. And the next book I recommend to your reading is this one. Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality specifically, but you could apply this to any kind of inequality. Now we've got climate justice. Now we've got, housing justice, all these different inequalities, not just this one. As soon as you give any credence to the idea that only equal would be fair, you've voided the law. The law is gone. It's on life support. Ibram X. Kendi, when Biden was elected, said, now we need a cabinet level position, a Department of Equity. That would have erased the Constitution. It would have put that department above all everything else, above the other branches of government. So thank you, Adrian. Reminder, climate justice is fraud. Yes, it is. Well, as are all the other qualified justices. They all are. And to that end, I want to share something with you from Dennis Prager. And I think this is pretty relevant. We're talking about anti-Semitism and so on. Here's something he says: first, fight for yourself, then society. It comes up a lot because in the materials I showed you from that article, the article where it said, the kids were storming out of their classroom or whatever, in the learning materials, it said, being Jewish, part of being Jewish is social justice. That's a lie. And here he addresses this. First, fight yourself, then society. The case for the Torah. He says, some 20 years ago, I was putting my older son, then about 8 years old, to bed and asked him what he learned that day in school. Normally, he would answer, as boys usually do, nothing. But that night, he had an answer. I learned I have a yetzer hara, he told me. As a student at a religious Jewish school, he was using the Hebrew term for the desire to do what is wrong. It is basic Jewish theology that the human being has two innate drives, one for good, yetzer hatov, and one for bad, yetzer hara, and that we have to battle our yetzer hara throughout our life. This is a significant way in which the Torah's value system differs from that of the dominant secular and liberal value system. The latter's primary emphasis is on battling society to promote social justice, not on battling the self. Of course, the Torah also seeks to create a just society, but that is not the same as what the left refers to as social justice. While justice is central to the Torah, there is no term social justice. In the Torah and the prophets, there is only justice, tzedek or tzedekah. When you add a modifier to justice, you modify its meaning deliberately because you obviously find the term justice insufficient. Social justice usually means social equality, which is not the same as justice. And it means, more than anything, using the state to redistribute wealth so that equality can be achieved. That, too, is not the same as justice. How would you do that? You'd have to choose good guys, bad guys, people who should have, people who should not have. It's not just about who has and who doesn't. It's who should have and who should not have. And in the case, of course, of the Middle East, is who should have what we call Israel and who should not have it. All fits neatly with this whole social justice concept. Moreover, placing social equality above other values has led to terrible moral distortions. I think we've seen that. While I suspect that a few liberal readers of this column have expressed affection for Fidel Castro, many of the most prominent liberal leaders of the last 50 years have. Oh, that few liberal readers have expressed, many have in the past 50 years. Norman Mailer, the member of the Congressional Black Caucus, Robert Redford, um, Ted Turner, Steven Spielberg, and Jesse Jackson, among many others, have visited Cuba and spoken glowingly of Castro. Why? Because though he was a totalitarian tyrant, though there is no freedom in Cuba, and though he destroyed that country's economy, Castro advocated social equality. Similarly, by valuing social justice over personal integrity, the most prominent American artists of the second half of the 20th century, Leonard Bernstein, and almost every leading cultural figure in New York City felt morally progressive in hosting fundraisers in their homes for the Black Panthers. That the Panthers were a violent group of racists who announced at these very fundraisers that killing pigs, their term for police, was noble in no way disturbed Bernstein and his friends. What mattered was their social justice ideal of opposing white racism. So this is where, people have said, well, aren't Jews for social justice? Da, da, da. Maybe those individuals who got it into their head that the American version, this American liberal, progressive, left-leaning Democrat Party version of justice that is different from what it says in our holy book, the Torah, maybe that's what they think. But no, it does not say that in Jewish texts. Jews are not taught social justice. Incorrect. And just because somebody can go find a Jew or even a group of Jews who go on and on about social justice does not make that a Jewish teaching. Any more than the fact that you could go find a Catholic or a Christian who goes on and on about something, whether it's social justice, whether it's, gay rights, even though that doesn't align with their texts, whatever it is, does not mean that the texts say that the religion says that, or that the culture espouses that. Doesn't mean that at all. This preoccupation with equality and fairness over justice is also why the left believes that courts should be far more than umpires of justice. They believe the courts should promote equality and fairness. It's not the job of the courts to do that. It's supposed to be blind. The Torah has a different view of the role of the courts. Do not favor the poor in judgment is Torah law. Because courts are not they're not set up to promote fairness and equality, but only to administer justice. In our personal lives, we should all promote fairness. But the moment that becomes the goal of courts, justice becomes, in the Torah's description, perverted. Judaism believes that the road to a just society is paved by individual character development. The greatest difference between my yeshiva education and secular education since the 1960s is that I was taught the biggest moral challenge in my life was me. You think kids today are being taught that? Your biggest moral challenge is you? Or do you think they're being taught your biggest moral challenge is persuading everybody else to do what you want, or persuading everybody else to pursue the same good that, you and your group of people support? Okay. So I wanted to just bring that up because that comes up a lot. It comes up a lot, but doesn't Jews believe in disability? No. No, Jewish teachings teach about justice, not social justice, justice. And just like the original Christian text, like Judeo-Christian theology that was the foundation of the United States Constitution, because it was, anybody who denies it is just like false. It was, okay, that's what our founders knew. That was the foundation of it. There were other documents too, but that was, English common law, things like that. But that was the system of values and morality that they knew, and they based it on that. Both taught that same thing. This whole Jesus would do social justice, again, I've read the Bible. I don't see anything in there from Jesus that says, go get your government to compel everybody to do the thing. Doesn't say that in the Bible. In fact, nowhere did Jesus mention changing the society in which he found himself. I think it's safe to say Jesus found himself in an oppressive, tyrannical society where the government was terribly unfair. We did not have social equality or any other kind of equality. And he wasn't out there going, the Romans shouldn't tax, they should give the taxes to these people, and the Romans should do this, and the Romans should do that. Nope. Jesus was out there teaching what Jews should be doing, what people in his own culture should be doing, how they should be relating to God, how they should be struggling against themselves and their own, as he says, what your fight is with you, not the Romans. I thought that was the whole point. But instead, today we get this like, no, compel the government. No, that was not mentioned. But there are kids walking around who think it was. Thank you so much for the super chat, Nomo. Equity, schmequity, conflict theory, communism with a different name. Keep up the good work. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Valley Girl and the low voice you just did are equally represented in the schools. Both purport to know everything about everything that they don't. That is true. That is very true. Thank you. Leave them kids alone. And Adrian says, as a Catholic, no, Jesus wouldn't be for social justice. He came to help individuals. Correct. The struggle is with yourself. That is why in Catholicism, you go into confession alone. Okay. I mean, yes, the priest is there and so forth, but you are there to confess. It's not you and your group of people going and say, we haven't done enough. We, the such and such category of people are bad. No, this is it's you. And the collectivism is decidedly secular. The fact that it's trying to invade religious teachings or co-opt religious teachings or use them to advance a political agenda is, predictable, but it needs to be fought. And when it comes to this stuff about empathy, I submit to you that they are teaching our kids empathy less as a social and emotional skill and more as a religious tenet. It doesn't even mean empathy anymore. It can't, because you, as we said, you cannot, nor should you be inclined to feel empathy for everyone all the time. You just can't. And you shouldn't, because you really do, in order to be a moral person, in order to make good choices yourself, you have to make moral choices. You have to make moral judgments about other people. You have to. How else? You could end up in relationships with horrible people. You could end up doing business with or working for horrible people who ask you to do horrible things. You have to make judgments. So how are you going to make those judgments? Against what measurement? Well, I submit to you that using equity and empathy, they've created this. They're tenets of this new religion, this neo-Marxist new religion. And empathy is just one of those tenets, just like social justice. These are all new doctrines. They don't have anything to do with reality. And the reason it's fueling anti-Semitism, in my view, and it won't end there, so I don't want to sound like it's exclusive to Jews. It's not. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, then whoever's left, and it keeps going. But is that a lot of this curriculum I showed you was created by Muslim groups on behalf and funded. We know about all the funding coming in from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and so forth since 9/11. So it's funded by, created by these groups with the intent of preferencing the arguments of the Islamists, and that would include Hamas, that would include the Palestinians right now, over whoever's arguing with them, which is the Jews, which is Israel. Right? If there were no Israel, then they wouldn't have, the need to do that, and they'd be pursuing something else. Then it would be against the Christians. So, less people think like, well, if we just let them have right of return into Israel, and just, let there be a state, whatever, and this will all blow over. No, it won't. Then they'll have to create a new bad guy, and they're already doing it. There are already Muslims inside of England and other parts of Europe saying, hey, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to turn all the people here Muslim. That's next. That's clearly on the agenda. Look what happened in Moscow. They're not Jews. So they start with the Jews, the canaries in the coal mine. It's a tiny minority, very easy to get people, especially Americans who, a lot of whom have never met a Jew, or if they have, it's this tiny little minority of people. Very easy to persuade them about some of the, the negative stories. And once you get that ball rolling, once you get people sort of dialed into the idea of where's my new bad guy, where's my bad guy, where's the bad guy that makes me a good person, you just pick up the next one right after that. It's just an easy one to get started. Always has been for thousands of years. The easiest one to start with. So that's what I have for you. Oh, Ego Brain says they have far more kids than us too. It's true. It's true. And when you have Jews and Christians not reproducing at replacement rates, you end up with demographic takeover even before you have to worry about the rest. Um, okay, it says, leave them kids alone, says Sarah Sophia. Lefties would disagree completely. I've seen tons of biblical memes lately. They craft a whole big lie around it. I think most of them have been from Occupy Democrats, but I'm not sure. Yes, that is happening. And then, of course, we've seen on social media the last couple of months, I guess, we've seen this James Lindsay has called it out, this, Christian nationalist thing, but now we have the Christ is King and people are falling for it. And it's really kind of sad. People think it's not anti-Semitic. Well, obviously, simply saying Christ is King, like on Easter Sunday, or even on, whether it's, Good Friday or even Palm Sunday or whatever, saying something like that, of course it's not anti-Semitic. That would be ridiculous. You're just observing a holiday and you're saying something maybe to another Christian. Even on social media, if you say that in the context of a post about your religion, irrespective of anything else, it's just it is what it is, right? It'd be like me saying, Lashana Tova or something like whatever, But when you are saying Jews, Israel, genocide, Christ is King, yeah, not quite the same meaning. Then it's this to Jewish people. And everybody knows it. It's like denying it is completely ridiculous at this point. Context is everything. Everything. I saw a great thread today on Twitter that explained it so perfectly. And the guy said, look, I could say, eat some cornbread. And if I'm saying it to my 5-year-old who's not eating their dinner, but I know they like cornbread, and I say, eat some cornbread, obviously there's nothing racist about saying eat some cornbread. But if I say eat some cornbread on the heels of a post where I'm accosting somebody who's black, or or I'm saying something about black people, or I'm asking questions about black culture, really? Eat some cornbread? Is Come on. Context is everything. And so what we're seeing is that, or people just coming in and going, Christ is King, Christ is King, Christ is King. And it's obviously a bless your heart in a nasty way to Jews. And this is now coming from the right. And so where we are right now, and I forgot to share this with you actually, and I meant to do, where we are in the evolution of the anti-Semitism at this point is we're here. We're about here. So you've got 2001. It says why critical race theory is the biggest threat to Jews in America today. I don't know if I call it critical race theory. I just call it critical theory, critical social justice theory, all of that. Okay. Now at this point, we've got all kinds of critical theories. 2001, anti-Semitism before this, you'd have the average American saying it's never right to racially discriminate or believe in racial stereotypes. And there's James Lindsay, but everybody's saying the same thing. And the average American. And you would have a left-wing anti-Semite saying Jews are really colonizers. Look at Israel. They were, back in 2001, they still said that. And then on the right, you'd have Jews secretly run everything like the banks and the media. They've always been in existence on the right. So we've had these little tiny groups of people on the extremes who said these stupid, bigoted stereotypes. After critical theory and after 20 years of this kind of curriculum that has the good guys and the bad guys, plus empathy is the highest value, empathy for the oppressed. Now the average American is saying it's okay to discriminate against people if they benefit from racial privilege and blame them for things that happened in the past based on their skin color as anti-racism. That's what the media, universities, Maris Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Nicole Hannah-Jones tells me. And the left anti-Semitism says Jews are actually white and benefit from whiteness. And, now they've sort of amped it up. And on the right, the media and education system says all whites are racist, but Jews hide behind their whiteness and never get blamed. I can't criticize Jews or else I'm anti-Semitic. I can't just ask questions about how weird it is that there's so many Jews in entertainment and so many Jews in media. And I'm just asking questions, and I can't just even make an observation or else I'm anti-Semitic. And I can't say this and I can't say that. And it's like, you can say whatever you want. Knock yourself out. But yeah, it is anti-Semitic because you're still asking a question about why Jews. You're still collectivizing a group of people and making, whether it's a behavior or an outcome, tied to a group identity. And that is no different than if instead of Jews, you said white people. And the same group of people will be like, racism. So you took out white and you put in Jewish. It's bad all around. It's bad either way. But they think it's okay now. I'm just asking questions. And they still have the Jews secretly run everything, whatever. So this is where we are now in the evolution of this. And that's how we got there. The only difference I'll say is the people on the right over here are not much concerned with empathy. They don't give a shit about empathy except for themselves. So in other words, you'll see a lot of like, wah, I'm being persecuted. I'm a Christian and I'm being persecuted. Wah, says Candace Owens. No, honey, you're not being persecuted because you're Christian. You're being persecuted because I'm not going to say it. You're a lot of things that I don't want to say on YouTube, but you're not being persecuted at all, first of all. And you were fired for good reason. And people don't like you for good reason. And you're obsessive. I'm just asking questions. And why did you use this? And why did you use that? As if there's such a thing as Jews without realizing that if people said blacks, 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 blacks in the exact same way that you're saying Jews, you'd take issue with it. And you should, because we don't talk about people in groups like that and also call ourselves, liberty loving conservatives or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing about that isn't just like the people on the left. But she's whining and crying and, having all kinds of feelings for herself and people who are like her, but no empathy for anybody else. And I mean, you could at least say the socialists and the communists on the left are like busy having all kinds of feels for other people they probably ought not have feels for, but they don't seem to be too concerned about themselves unless they're in one of those groups. Then they do. But that's it. That's what's going on. That's where we are. All right. Yeah. Ego brain. Everyone knows why they're saying the thing they're saying. Of course we do. And they're like, oh, so it's anti-Semitic? Oh. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Nobody has ever, I know lots of very devout Christian people. I'm friends with lots of them. And not one of them has ever said to me in any context, ever, Christ is king. Just never said that to me. I've not even, to be honest with you, heard them say it to each other, like in their presence. Like I've heard he is risen on Easter Sunday. Heard that. But I've never heard the whole Christ is king thing said that way. And to my ear, even though I'm not Christian, it sounds a whole lot like taking the Lord's name in vain. From what I've read about what that looks like. That's what it sort of sounds like. Is that it's not about Christ at all. It's about a kind of self-identification. I'm a Christian and you're not. And I don't think that's what being a Christian's about. Again, I could be wrong because I'm not one. But from my reading, my research, my knowledge of Christian people I've known very well and had as very close friends and so forth, it's not about constantly patting yourself on the back or, genuflecting to each other. Yeah, I'm a Christian. So are you. Yeah, Christ is king. Yeah, go you, go me. Not really feeling it. So that is the reason you don't hear it all that much, because Christ is the Son of God in Christianity. Like I said, from my reading of the Bible, I don't think Christ had any intention of being a king or wanted to be a king in any worldly sense or even any metaphysical sense. Didn't. No, like you said, Son of God, not king of anything. King has all kinds of worldly implications that I don't think are tied to Christianity. Could be wrong. Not a Christian. But as a Jew, and mostly, atheist Jew at that, secular Jew, but who's well-versed in my own, religion and the Bible, I can tell you, I don't see how the Christ is king thing is this neutral statement, the way it's being used. It's not. And I think this is where it comes from, all this critical theory crap. So I hope that you guys found this informative and helpful and useful in some kind of way. I would strongly recommend that you push back on your kids' schools if they're pushing empathy, which I can tell you that they are. Ask more questions, demand answers. You can do it very tactfully. Just keep pestering them, like, but why? But how do you know? According to whom? Says who? Etc. Feel free to ask these questions and challenge it to your kids too. If your kids are still in school and they come home, ask them about empathy and what they think about it, and make sure they understand. And they might actually be grateful secretly. Make sure they understand that they're under no obligation to feel empathy for everybody, least of all people they are instructed to feel empathy for. That is actually quite dangerous. That is how you end up with people saying, "Oh, it's okay that there's a man in the restroom with me or the locker room with me because empathy. I don't want to lack empathy. So I'll let down my guard and my boundaries and I'll share personal details of my life and I'll let men in my spaces and I'll, like date people I really don't want to date and I'll say things I don't really want to say because empathy." So make sure that your kids understand that according to you and your values and what you want them to walk around the earth with, you're not holding them accountable to that. And that it's perfectly okay for them to hold a piece of themselves back and not feel empathy for other people. It is quite oppressive, actually, to demand that somebody feel empathy for you. You can't demand it. You just can't, because real empathy requires a person to willingly, to voluntarily go to the place where you are, especially if it's a negative emotion, and not only have all of us not had the identical experience that someone is asking us for empathy for, because we literally haven't been them or in their shoes, but if we have to approximate, if we have to find something in our own background that was as painful or negative or unpleasant so we can like try to feel their perspective, you're demanding that someone put themselves in a place they don't want to be. Most of us, especially in school, are like, I'm trying to get through the day just like you. Don't demand that I feel uncomfortable or I go back to a negative memory of when I did feel uncomfortable so that I can relate to your discomfort. There's a kind of a narcissism there that says, I demand your empathy. No, you can't even demand sympathy. If you get it, that's a nice thing, but it's a gift. And it's a gift that has to be given willingly, or else it's a boundary violation. And I think it's something that we parents have to be much more intentional about teaching our children what it is, what it's not, who can ask for it, and who cannot. And I would argue no one, not even you parents, can demand empathy from a child, from another person, period. And one of the most important lessons you can teach them is that you get to decide who gets your heart, who gets your feelings, who gets your guard lowered to where you can sit in a place of that level of discomfort on their behalf. You decide, nobody else. Anyway, thank you very much, you guys. Please like, share, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. If you would like to talk more with me and other people who are talking about these issues, I would encourage you to join my Discord community at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn. We have a private Discord. I do 2 private shows there a week on Monday and on Friday. Mondays is about homeschooling topics. Fridays about more educational and cultural stuff that I don't put out here publicly. It's private for members only. I also am available for my members when they want to talk to me and chat with me, whatever. And I have a parent support group separately called The Reason We Parent that meets on Wednesdays and Sundays for people who want to get together and chat about stuff they're going through in their own schools with their own kids, or just want to vent and, get it off their chest, but in a private, secure place that isn't Facebook behind a paywall where nobody can harass you. So those are both at wokescreen.com, and you just go up to communities and you can find them. And I hope to see you there. Have a great evening, you guys. And don't forget, they can't do it without your money. They can't do it without your compliance. Have a good one.